Recently, I had the opportunity to attend their open house. The couple was celebrating their 50th wedding anniversary. And so it was an opportunity for me to go and to congratulate them, as is our custom here, much like we have the opportunity today after Mass to be able to say thank you and to congratulate Sister Mary Kay Mahowald, a Franciscan sister who spent some of those 50 years of her Golden Jubilee right here in our area faith community, serving us in so many ways. But as I approached this couple, preparing and celebrating their 50th wedding anniversary, and I congratulated them, I looked at the gentleman, the husband in this case, and I said, well, how were those first 50 years? And he looked at me and he smiled, and then he just smiled. He didn't respond. And his wife was getting nervous as she was standing next to him in the receiving line. And so then I said, well, let me rephrase it differently then. Would you do it over again? And there was a pause. And he smiled. And he said, Father Steve, of course I would do it all over again. But he said, what I would do in doing it over again is I would do some things differently. And then his wife looked at him and nudged him with her elbow and said, and what sort of things would you do differently? And he looked at her and said, honey, we don't have time to discuss that right now. We have a lot of people to say thank you to. Would you do it all over again? Absolutely. But I would do it differently. It's what Jesus wants those in the gospel today to do. To do things differently. To be a disciple, to be a follower, to be one who is going to, set out with our Lord to the destination, which is Jerusalem. You have to do things differently. And in order to get people to do things differently in our gospel today, did you notice the one thing that they all have in common is Jesus rebuked every one of them? Is it any wonder then that Jesus had any followers? Is it any wonder that people would actually then say yes to his invitation to come and to follow him? Because they wanted to do things their way. They wanted to, send down fire from heaven to consume them, why James and John, the sons of thunder, did, because after all, these people were not hospitable. They weren't welcoming them into their town. And so, of course, James and John, they had the answer. They knew what it meant to be a disciple of Christ. Let's just consume them with fire from heaven. And Jesus rebukes them and invites them to do things differently. And he invites them to not spend so much time and energy on revenge, but rather to seek other avenues, other opportunities, and other towns to be able to bring the good news there. And then, there's that disciple that it says, Lord, I'm going to follow you wherever you go. And Jesus rebukes them as well by saying the foxes have dens and the birds of the sky have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. Jesus wants this person who is so eager to follow Jesus wherever he goes to realize this, my friends, is not a path of glory. The glory that you are seeking is not found in some throne or in some power trip, but rather Jesus wants this disciple to understand that if you're going to go on this journey, which is a journey, my friends, of love, you have to expect some hardship in a world that is oftentimes incredibly cruel and inhospitable. And then there's that disciple that says, Lord, I want to follow you, but I got to do this first. I got to bury the dead. I have to I have to get permission from my family. And Jesus rebukes them as well Let the dead bury their dead. And why is it that you need to seek the permission of others to say yes to the invitation to follow me? So Jesus is always inviting people on the road that leads to Jerusalem to look at things, to see things, to believe things, to do things differently. Because the kingdom is different than what you and I oftentimes think it is or should be or ought to be. Because the kingdom is about suffering, and the kingdom is about service, and the kingdom is about experiencing inhospitality, and it is a kingdom about why people that oftentimes are not going to hear the message, which is one of love and one of forgiveness and one of reconciliation and not one of revenge or getting even or retaliation. And that, my friends, is hard for us. Our yes to the Lord so oftentimes comes with it strings that are attached. Well, Lord, I'll follow you, but I have to do this first. Lord, I'll do this if you do this for me. Lord, I'll be your disciple, but, there's usually always a but. So Jesus today invites you and I to follow him with no reservations, but rather that you and I would do so each and every day, no matter our vocation, whether it be marriage or the single life or priesthood or religious life, no matter what God has called us in our vocation to be, he invites us to join with him on the road, a road that leads to Jerusalem. Jerusalem, a place of suffering. Jerusalem, a place of death. Jerusalem, a place of hope. Jerusalem, a place of newfound freedom. Jerusalem, a place that invites us to experience life and life in abundance. So let us be on our way. Let our yes be a resounding yes. Let us follow him always and everywhere.